I was left stranded in another state because my family thought it would be hilarious. Find out if he can return. Driving away, they chuckled. I returned no more. After 15 years, 107 missed calls led them to me. I had anticipated that the summer of my 22nd birthday would be ordinary. I stayed at home with my dad because Banks didn't think college was practical, worked for peanuts at our hardware store, and was always Alan's punching bag, even though I was the golden child. We weren't dirt poor, but we also weren't the kind to go on Disney vacations. I should have seen trouble when the bank said we were going on a road trip to Colorado for my uncle's wedding. I regretted not coming up with a reason to stay home 3 days into that dreadful road journey. Salvador was put through hell because my dad and Alan were taking turns playing their favorite game. My mom, Irene, would occasionally use her weak voice to declare, "That's enough," but we knew it was all for show. I must tell you anything about my family. Banks wasn't your average jerk of a father. He was the nagging kind that would rage at you about a forgotten chore at 3 in the morning, would trash your belongings if they got in his way, and had been telling me I was useless ever since I could speak. Alan quickly realized that he could either emulate his dad or become just like me. You can probably guess his decision. Early that morning, we pulled over at a Colorado rest area that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. For miles, all we could see were farmland, distant mountains, and a depressing small restroom facility with vending machines. I needed to get out of the rear of our Suburban, where I'd been sleeping, because I was exhausted. Go to the restroom. Mom was looking at her makeup in the visor mirror as Alan and Dad were laughing about something. What I was wearing is a precise memory of mine. Those old beat-up Vans I'd had for years, pants with a hole in the knee, and a faded Metallica t-shirt. My phone was charging in the car, so I left it behind. Stayed true to my principles and didn't steal my wallet. I was simply taking a leak as we were in the midst of nowhere. Just 10 minutes. I spent exactly that amount of time in that restroom. Possibly fewer. I had to pinch myself to see in the bright Colorado sunshine, but the parking spot was vacant when I emerged. There was no sign of our emerald green suburb. I assumed they were doing a prank at first, thinking they had relocated it. Throughout the entire rest area, I strolled. Completely non-existent. It's a fact of life when someone you care about betrays you. No other sort hits like it. They were probably only attempting to frighten me, so I sat on the curb for an hour and told myself that they would return. Some people gave me strange stares as they came and went. A truck driver wanted to know how I was doing. I made everything up. My girlfriend was in the restroom, so I pretended to be waiting for her. His departure was signaled by a nod. I began to feel that chilly sensation in my stomach after 2 hours. Returned they would not be. I immediately thought to call someone and implore them to come get me by borrowing their phone. Something prevented me from approaching a mother with 2 children just as I was ready to do so. I felt a flood of recollections that will last a lifetime. Each and every shame. They would make fun of me every time. There was a punchline to every joke that was actually cruel. Their voices seemed so close. The voice of Alan. "Hey there. Looks like he's in tears right now. My father. If he's not as dim-witted as he seems, he'll figure it out." A feeble objection from my mother that accomplished nothing. And thus, I settled on a course of action. I didn't call my family, but I did beg that mom to let me use her phone. Grand Junction is approximately 40 miles away, but I was able to get the number of the closest shelter by calling information. Afterwards, I politely requested if she might kindly offer me a ride into town. I informed her that my family was compelled to leave due to an emergency, but that they would send someone to pick me up later. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually accepted, so I must have appeared harmless enough. A sobering realization hit that first night in the shelter. All I possessed were the garments that covered my body. Absent identification. Devoid of funds. Absolutely no one to talk to. After I saw my uncle's address on a wedding invitation, I asked Dave, one of the shelter workers, if I could use their computer to search it up. Maybe I could make it to the nuptials. It is where my family lives. But as I sat there, my mind wandering to the question, why? Why, for the sake of a good chuckle, should I pursue those who left me for dead? A fresh email account was instead set up by me. In case someone required an emergency replacement ID, I researched where they could get one. To find cash-paying occupations, I used Google. A plan was devised by me. I washed dishes at a little eatery named Sonny's 2 days after that. Geraldine, the owner, was an unusually tattooed woman in her 60s with gray hair streaked with purple. My wallet had been taken, but I needed work. I had wandered in, inquired if they needed any help, and told her that. The dishwasher stopped working yesterday. She appraised me and told me, "To steal from me is to die. Begin immediately. The problem about being at rock bottom is that only upwards can you go from that point." I did doubles for a week. Took a nap at the shelter. Put on clothing that were given to me. Dave got me in touch with my home state's Vital Records Department, which is the first step in obtaining a replacement ID. With my first paycheck, I set up a budget pay-as-you-go phone from Walmart. I didn't hear from them again until 7 days after they left. A mysterious figure. "Yes," I said. My mother's voice trembled as she answered. "Who am I? Am I all right? They have searched every possible place. Complete and utter rubbish. I thought it was all in good fun. Completely false. They returned after waiting for 20 minutes down the road, but they still couldn't locate me. Complete and utter nonsense." I took note of her distress. Her pretended worry. My dad was nagging me to calm down and go to Uncle Rick's house, but I could barely make out his voice. It sounded like Alan was chuckling. "Is Salvador present? Raise your hand." Became aware of his angry Facebook posts about it. Worsening desperation and animosity in the posts. Family became this strange temple on Mom's social media. Reminiscences of happier times captured in timeless snapshots. Messages of longing for her sons. Plural. So that was affluent. Not once did she bring me up, even when tagging Alan. It seemed as though my existence had been completely annihilated. For a while, Alan was unemployed. There is a lot of nebulous scheduling with haters and fresh chances. The archetypal social media facade of a person whose life is in shambles. Geraldine pulled me aside during inventory 3 years in and revealed that she was considering opening a second Sonny's on the opposite side of town. They wanted to know if I would be interested in taking charge of it. Not possessing. Keeping moving forward. Crucial difference. It was a restless night for me. I kept assuming it was a test or a joke. Such opportunities were not available to people like me. That much had been clarified by banks. That is the issue with harmful ideologies. Even after you've gotten away from the serpent, they'll still be in your system. Yet I agreed. As Kendra, who was sound asleep next to me, murmured something about how foolish it would be for me not to, I understood. Doug, who was high when I brought it up, responded, "Duh, you practically run the original place already," despite his marijuana-induced haze. For the simple reason that Geraldine was never Banks, was never a member of my family, and had never once diminished my self-worth. 6 months after that, Sonny's East was opened. Less in size than the initial. New menu options. Here is my menu. I put in 90-hour weeks during my first year. Lost 10 pounds that were financially disastrous for me. Disputed with Kendra over her failure to return home. Once or twice upon returning home, I found passive-aggressive post-it notes on the refrigerator. Nonetheless, the outcome was satisfactory. Many showed up. A number of people returned. I enjoyed my meal. Everything felt right. We were making ends meet, not getting rich. I was able to assist Kendra with her medical school debts 4 years after she was abandoned. Some, but not all. Inhumane those things are. However, it is sufficient to create a noticeable impact. Upon seeing the confirmation of payment, she burst into tears. Not the kind of movie quality, mascara-perfect tears. True sobbing. Coughing, red-faced, snorting, sobbing. At that one moment, I felt more human than at any other time in my life. Next, my grandma passed away. It was Facebook that enlightened me. With a million heart emojis, Mom shared this lengthy and dramatic homage. Only Grandma Rose had ever defied Banks in the family. It appeared that no one else could see me. When no one was around, she would sneak $20 cash into my pocket. Warn me to hold on to it till I can get away. College, I believe she was implying. As it turned out, the meaning was more straightforward. It was in my mind to attend the funeral. Looked up flights even more. I would be accompanied by Kendra, she replied. Join me in this terrible reunion by holding my hand. If I preferred not to drive, Doug offered to let me use his terrible hatchback. Dead people don't know whether you're there or not, Geraldine shrugged and added. So, do what makes you feel at ease. I stayed home. Flowers were instead sent. Generic sympathy arrangement. I, Salvador, have signed the card. The address is missing. I didn't notice. Not a single one. As soon as word got out, social media went into overdrive. A mother's message regarding signals and a message from beyond the grave. Alan making enigmatic remarks on sons that wander off. No public statement from Banks. On the other hand, I could picture the tempest in the shadows. Someone whose profile I didn't recognize asked to be my friend a week after that. A name out of the blue. Missing posts. Completely alone. Seeing the message prevented me from deleting it. This is Uncle Rick, Sal. Your previous email, which your mom sent me, bounced back. Are you all right? We have been concerned. Everyone seems to be curious about you, even your dad. The account has been blocked. For the first time in 2 years, I suffered a panic attack that evening. Tucked into bed at 3 in the morning. Steering clear of rousing Kendra. I thought my lungs were going to burst. I can almost feel the Banks coming after me. Make an appearance at Sunny's. Ripping down all of my creations. And an hour after that, Kendra tracked me down. Opted not to inquire further. I was alone with them. My shoulder rested on hers. The moment my breathing returned to normal, she uttered the most basic words. Anything you don't offer them, they can't take. A lawyer was contacted the following morning. Received guidance on restraining orders as a precaution. All of my privacy settings have been tightened. Please do not disclose any information about me to anyone, I asked Geraldine. Actionable measures. Handle the things under your power. Kendra and I tied the knot 5 years after she left me. Mature ceremony held in a park. Douglas served as my best man. Geraldine was so moved that she cried when she baked the cake. Her creased cheeks glisten with mascara. Immediate adoption ensued inside Kendra's boisterous, huge family. I was able to remain unfazed by her dad's crude jokes. I didn't set off any alarm bells when her mom hugged me. The beauty of finding family is that very thing. Occasionally, it reveals itself after you've ceased seeking. A week subsequent to the nuptials. In the middle of the night, I'm browsing my fake account. Observed it. Banking institutions post on a community website. Want to know more about Salvador, my son's pet. My last known whereabouts were in Grand Junction, Colorado. Urgent matter with a family member. An emergency did not occur. It was something I was already aware of. After 5 years of silence, I had no idea why they were suddenly trying to find me. After that, I continued to investigate. I made a new fictitious account. Become a member of our hometown's community groups. Reassembled it piece by piece. There was no longer any hardware store. Foreclosure had hit their home. Mom was evasive about several medical conditions. After getting a 3rd DUI, Alan returned home. They were too busy missing me to bother searching for me. They had a need, and they came searching for me. And guess what? Thinking about them brought a smile to my face after 5 long years. I didn't feel good about their misery for that reason. However, I came to a significant realization. I had lost interest. With my laptop shut, I climbed into bed with my sleeping wife and came to a conclusion. From a distance, I would continue to watch. Without animosity. I don't love it. Reason being, taking action isn't always the best form of retribution. Their focus should be on self-destruction, while you focus on construction. Updated at last. It all began with a notification from LinkedIn. 15 years after being left at that Colorado rest area, my meticulously planned life experienced a hiccup. In the span of 1 day, my profile garnered 27 views. Typical of LinkedIn. That kind of strange behavior is common among recruiters. The name was the peculiar thing. Matthews. Alan. Brother of mine. What's interesting about looking back is... Calm down. Before it attacks, It will hide in the tall grass for a long time. Before that, my life in Grand Junction had been completely transformed. Kendra was able to spend more time with our children after completing medical school and residency. She currently works 3 days a week at a nearby clinic. It was a pair. Marcus is 4 years old, and Ellie is 7. A modest 4-bedroom on the outskirts of town has replaced the apartment above the laundromat. Not much, but it had a yard where the kids could run around and I could plant tomatoes, which were never very successful. 3 places were now part of Sunny's empire. I no longer had to man the line unless someone called in sick. This was still not a huge franchise, but it was plenty. Even though Geraldine had semi-retired 2 years prior, she nevertheless turned up unannounced to offer criticism over our execution of her pie crust recipe. My history was no longer an issue for me. So the thinking went. From a distance, I continued to keep an eye on the family, but my once-a-month inspections had tapered off. As far as I was aware, Banks and Irene had downsized after losing their house. A marriage, a divorce, and a second marriage were all in Alan's past. Like me, they seemed to have gone on with our lives. However, the LinkedIn incident unsettled me. Finally, after 15 years of radio quiet, while doing our usual routine on Sunday nights, folding laundry while half-watching whatever Netflix show we were presently behind on, I brought it up to Kendra. Holding a pair of socks that didn't match, she halted and inquired about my well-being. Since I was at a loss for words, I simply nodded. That here I was, adrift at a rest stop, all of 22 years old? That the voice of Banks, speaking to me internally, deemed me useless? Maya at the front desk contacted me 3 days later to let me know that a family was requesting my services at Sunny's East, the original second location. I was helping out with inventory at the time because our supplier had shipped the wrong kind of coffee filters again. Since Kendra's parents occasionally caught us off guard when they were traveling through, they were the first to come to mind. I made my way to the front, my thoughts already turning to strategies for keeping them for supper. No, Kendra's family wasn't involved. The older, grayer Banks appeared. His once towering stature seemed to shrink. Years of fretting had squeezed Irene's face into that pinched expression. A dyed brown hue had been applied to her locks. Additionally, Alan resembled Banks at the age of 40. Consistent posture, consistent manner of occupying room. Along with him was a lady whose face I couldn't place. She seemed to be in her early 20s at the most, and she hung back as if uncertain of her place in the present. There was silence. I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears as the din of lunchtime rushed by. Financial institutions went bankrupt first. Almost posed a query by saying my name. It seemed like my voice had taken a vacation, so I just nodded. Listen, for the past 15 years, I had imagined this same moment in a myriad of various ways. In several renditions, I scolded them with great severity. In other cases, I remained icy and detached, unconcerned with their presence. Tearful reconciliation even occurred in a couple of uncomfortable late-night circumstances. Life is more chaotic in real life than in a fictional world. Sitting down across from the individuals who had once been my family, I motioned for Maya to fetch water and then pointed to a vacant table in the corner. I patiently waited. In Rocky Mountain Rising, 10 local success stories, they discovered my story. It was merely a sidebar featuring a photo of myself standing in front of Sunny's original location. It wasn't even a major feature. Still, it seems that a high school acquaintance of Mom's who had relocated to Colorado saw it and gave it to her along with the words, "Isn't this your son?" Written communication. 707 unanswered calls. That's the total amount of calls they had made to my previous number prior to its deactivation. Even Mom had kept score. As if it were meant to have some significance, she brought this up. They were talking over one other. Mother about their concerns. Banks regarding my misunderstanding of events that day. We're absolutely terrified. The icy sensation in my stomach had vanished. All that remained was clarity. I said, my voice more composed than it had ever been while conversing with him, that you wished to test my independence. Look at me. The phone went dead. Number blocked. After that, I blocked all the family numbers that came to me. The following day, I changed my number in its entirety at the Verizon store for precautionary reasons. 27 calls went unanswered before I finally changed the number. I could totally see them becoming increasingly irate as they realized their punching bag wasn't going anywhere. My very own studio flat, situated above a laundry, was mine a month after that. It was little and constantly reeked of fabric softener. However, I owned it. At Sonny's, where I worked my way up to prep cook, Geraldine showed me the ropes when it came to chopping veggies so I wouldn't hurt my fingers. Once in a while, I'd go into my old inbox, the one my loved ones knew. Messages accumulated. Given by Mother. Please return home, our apologies. Given by Dad. This ridiculous antics must stop immediately. Written by Alan. Listen, I was only making a joke. Put an end to being so weak. I didn't say anything. At least once. Because of this, freedom is very valuable. You can't return to your prison once you've tried it. It wasn't easy, I promise you. No amount of fucking with them could ever satisfy the agony I felt some nights when I scrolled through Instagram and saw photos of regular families that loved each other. Sometimes I felt like the world was closing in on me because of how lonely I was. Vacation was a complete bust. Still, I would get out of bed every morning in my musty, downy apartment, wash dishes at a job where no one ever told me I was useless, and piece my life together. I checked my email for the final time 3 months after they abandoned me at that rest break. A fresh communication from my mother arrived. Your grandma wants to know how you are doing. Just give us the good news that you're still here. The email was closed. The account was deleted. Into the trash can behind Sonny's went my old SIM card. Geraldine told me I had good hands for pastry that night as she taught me how to create her renowned apple pie. It had been a long time since I had received a sincere compliment. Once I went, I didn't turn around. Update 1. It took 5 long years after I was left for dead at that Colorado rest stop before I recognized a face on Facebook. Not because I was secretly checking out everyone's social media accounts. Well, maybe I was, but rather because Alan had recently been mentioned in a news story back home. Wrapping his vehicle around a telephone pole, he had obtained a DUI. Only the pole could be heard. One of his high school football pictures ended up in the press. His smugness belied his youth. In contrast to the enlarged mugshot on the reverse. Therein lies the crux of karma. Despite its sluggishness, it is impervious to address forgetfulness. I had begun to construct what seemed like a life in Colorado at that point. In the end, I was able to trade in my awful studio apartment over the laundromat for a 1-bedroom with windows. I was an assistant manager at Sonny's after working my way up the line from dishwasher. Geraldine still ruled the establishment with an iron grip and a delicate glove covered in flowers, but she had begun to regard me less as a charity case and more as an odd nephew or something. A good laptop was my first major buy when I started saving money. Just what is needed to enroll in community college online courses. Nothing flashy. Management of a company. What is basic accounting? I would start my day at Sonny's, study in the afternoon, and then return to work in the evening, following the pattern that the banks usually stated was for those who couldn't perform actual job. Listen, I'm not going to lie and say that what occurred didn't affect me. Problems with trust. As with subscription services for trusts, which I could terminate at any time if someone got too near. In 5 years, I had made precisely 2 pals. Doug, a neighbor of mine, who once gave me homemade beer that tasted like hoppy dishwater and played bass in a bad garage band. Also Geraldine, if she were considered a friend rather than a superior. When Kendra began frequenting Sonny's, everything changed. Consistently placed the same order every Tuesday and Thursday. A classic Denver omelet, no tomatoes, extra coffee, and a textbook perched on the counter. Medical school, I discovered afterwards. For long periods of time, she would stare off into space with her fork half in her mouth as she studied. At one point, I began timing her. She was holding cold eggs for a record 7 minutes and 23 seconds before she recognized it. She finally looked up at me after 4 months of me giving her coffee refills. You saw me, I swear. According to her, her name tag was misspelled, and her pupils enlarged slightly. Even if it wasn't, it became our oddball running joke. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would dress as someone else. Salvador has been named 3 times. She would make note of it. It would be an act of surprise on my part. Weirdest display of sexual interest ever seen. Nonetheless, the outcome was satisfactory. There was never any intention of our first date turning into a date. She was last minute dropped by her study group. It was next to impossible to get inside the pizza establishment where she had a reservation. It just so happened that she received the cancellation text while I was sweeping the counter. I was seated across from her at Antonio's the moment it occurred to me. We both felt self-conscious about how much this resembled a date. She occupied my residence 6 months after that. We moved into a somewhat larger place together a year later. Nothing flashy. It was just a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom place with quiet neighbors who didn't bust out bass solos at 2 in the morning. In the meanwhile, I used phony accounts to spy on my loved ones. It exists, and I am not proud of it. The opening of the Home Depot on the outskirts of town put a strain on Dad's hardware store. Alan made a clumsy attempt to seem as if we were old friends reuniting. It turned out that Poppy, the young woman who was Alan's second wife, was simply staring at me with intrigue. I gave them the floor. I watched as they pretended to be heroes in their own narrative. Observed Banks's fixation on the eatery as he speculated about its potential value. I noticed that my mother's hand quivered a little as she grabbed for her glass of water. Every time Alan felt my gaze drifting away from him, I could feel his practicing charm crumbling. I posed the one and only pertinent question when they finally lost interest. Why now? In the midst of those uncomfortable silences, the true tale began to emerge. Banks was uninsured, had medical expenses, and was managing cardiac issues. The second residence was also in the process of foreclosure. Something nebulous involving Bitcoin that Alan had dabbled in as a business had bombed. We couldn't afford to take Mom in for her knee surgery. Their purpose was not to facilitate reconciliation. Their motivation was financial gain. It was my fault for not being furious. I ought to have tossed them. Rather, an unexpected sensation washed over me. My condolences. How incredibly small. How utterly hopeless. Even though they had formerly dominated my life, these titans were really only human beings with problems. That evening, I extended an invitation to have supper at my place. Claimed I needed some time to reflect. In order to have a conversation with Kendra. Enthusedly, they consented. The Banks are basically ready to call it a done deal at this point. It felt like a dream that day. While messaging Kendra with dinner guest updates, I brought up Ellie from dancing class, assisted Marcus with his preschool show and tell, and more. Taking the children to her sister's house was her offer. I declined. I would have preferred it if they were. Delighted to have my loved ones meet mine. For supper, we had chicken enchiladas. What I did best, which wasn't that noteworthy. My only source for this recipe was an old El Paso box, which I had adapted over the years. Without asking, Ellie set the table, delicately positioning the forks on the incorrect side, which Kendra discreetly adjusted. On Tuesday, Marcus insisted on donning his Spider-Man suit, as if that were some sort of official designation. I was on my way to set the dish on the table when the doorbell sounded. Kendra said that she would always have my back and squeezed my arm as she walked past. Because they could feel something significant was happening, the children gazed up in curiosity. That is the thing with long-awaited moments of terror. When they do show up, you'll find that they're better and worse than you had anticipated. Making small talk was uncomfortable. Despite corrections, Banks continued to contact Kendra Karen. Marcus was absolutely terrified since Irene couldn't help but cry every time she looked at the kids. Poppy and Alan were the least terrible, trying to have a regular discussion despite Alan's constant hinting about family assisting family. Taking the kids upstairs for baths and bedtime after dinner, Kendra gave me a look that clearly stated, "Text me if you need extraction." We were left with only the two of us in a living room that seemed insufficient for our needs. Banks began on the pitch by talking about how close-knit their family is, how he'd always predicted that I'd achieve great things, and how they were simply in need of some assistance to get back on their feet. $2,000. Obviously, it's only a loan. His words were left unfinished by me. After that, I inquired as to whether he recalled our conversation on my 18th birthday. His expression was expressionless. "At least you won't be able to let me down legally," I reminded him. My admission letter to the community college was tossed in the trash by Banks, so I asked my mom if she remembered what she did. Completely non-existent. That was all she had done. In any case, I wanted to know if Alan recalled telling my first girlfriend that I was probably a faggot. They scrunched up and made up stories when she came to the house seeking me. Banks' voice began to take on that menacing quality that had before made me cower. I stopped shrinking, though, and that's the point. That person was 15 years and a galaxy away from me. After returning from my office with an envelope, I presented it to Banks. The envelope contained a $73.50 check. Banks was perplexed by it. It was at this point that he asked me what on earth this was intended to be. The exact amount that a Greyhound ticket would have cost between Grand Junction and our hometown in 2010 was exactly that. The precise amount of time I would have needed to return home from the point where they left me behind. The air was devoid of sound. After then, Banks began to yell. A person insulted me by calling me selfish and ungrateful. Claimed I had let them down from the start. As a farewell, the greatest hits album from my youth is playing. Avoiding an argument, I remained silent. I got to my feet and informed them it was time to go. Mother took a new tack. Gushing sobs. We are all guilty. In what way could I possibly harm my loved ones in this way? Coldness spread across Alan. The amiable brother's mask fell off entirely. For everyone to see, Poppy simply looked embarrassed. As soon as they departed, Banks crumpled the check and tossed it upon our front step. Leaning against it, I shut the door. Feet start to quiver. Downstairs, Kendra appeared. Wanted to know whether I was becoming worse. Although I was hesitant to speak out, I nodded nonetheless. Silently, we wiped down the dinnerware. Ensured the well-being of the children napping on the couch. Typical evening routine included getting ready for bed. I activated the front door camera on my phone while I was configuring the security system. The driveway still held them. Arguing. Flustered Banks. Mother sobbing. I knew Alan's expression as he stared at our house. Anger and jealousy fused. At long last, they hopped in their rental vehicle and hit the road. They vanished without a trace. I really doubt it. This chapter comes to an end. Therein lies the essence of vengeance. Not doing anything is the greatest way to get it. You experience it firsthand. Every joyful moment spent with my children. All of Kendra's inside jokes. On every calm Sunday morning, free from worry. One mundane day at a time in a life I've created for myself. I was never able to return home. Somehow, I managed to do better. One that I constructed.